The New Europeans is a 2016 espionage thriller by the British author James Ward, Me, the eighth novel in the now finished Tales of MI7 series. It's about Britain's place in Europe, and it's set during the run-up to the 2016 EU membership referendum. Everyone had known since the Conservative victory in 2015 that there would be a referendum, and I started writing the novel early in that process. Recent history often gets distorted, written accounts are often controversial, and people's memories are unreliable, so it's easy to forget what the lead up to the vote felt like. The word Brexit still seemed a bit artificial. Grexit was the original term, inspired by the possibility of a Greek exit. In 2015, the French politician Marine Le Pen had said, "Just call me Madame Frexit." There were a variety of national movements advocating EU departure, most at least fairly right-wing. In that context, it wasn't hard to imagine that something continent-shattering might be imminent. The New Europeans is about a plot by a pan-European clique of business leaders and politicians to demolish the EU, with Britain's exit, which they intend to guarantee via a manufactured crisis, as the catalyst. The coming new Europe will resemble the old one, a loose confederation of nations with a disdainful view of the rest of the world. Civilization, they believe, is an almost exclusively European construct. Its creative source was cut off by 2 world wars and an anemic social project run from Brussels, but it can be restored. The chief British conspirator is a Conservative MP called Charles Blanchard. He's a conviction politician rather than an opportunist, and highly intelligent. He knows right at the beginning of the story that in order to succeed, he has to stymie MI7, and in particular John Mordred, since he's its most talented member. He does this partly by triggering an investigation into Mordred's supposed radicalization, which is more effective than it might seem. The discouragement of radicalization was the focus of a real government initiative in 2015 and still ongoing in 2024, caused initially perhaps by the malign influence of ISIS, but supposedly directed at radicalism more generally. Of course, it raises important moral questions, since many of the best movements in human history were radical, and there's a sense in which John Mordred really is a radical. I wanted to explore that. Towards the end of the novel, one of Blanchard's co-conspirators, an enigmatic Frenchman called Jean-Paul Crevier, tells Mordred all this right and left-wing nonsense. So 20th century, don't you think? Which is another major theme. To what extent are political allegiances in the process of realignment, and where does that leave the centre? Blanchard may be a conservative, but his conservatism is highly unorthodox, and by that I don't mean that he's vulgarly far right. That wouldn't be very interesting. The story begins when one of Blanchard's closest colleagues, a Brexiteer MP called Frances Holland, goes missing. A journalist turns up who appears to know more than she's willing to tell, but who only appears when she's least expected, and who doesn't seem to have a fixed address. The trail leads Mordred to France, and just as he thinks he's got everything figured out, as usual, it's partly a detective story, catastrophe strikes. The novel finishes just before the referendum. It's tempting to call it a speculative novel, but it's about what happens behind the scenes, which could have been something like this, I suppose. Who knows? Anyway, that's the New Europeans.